November 1978. The name Guyana was barely a whisper on the global stage. But in a matter of days, this small South American nation would be etched into the world's consciousness forever. It was here that Jim Jones, the enigmatic and controlling leader of the People's Temple, orchestrated an unimaginable tragedy. The murder of U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan, several journalists, and over 900 residents of Jonestown, his utopian-turned-deadly settlement. In the aftermath, Jones himself would take his own life. But who was the man behind this horrific event? James Warren Jones was born in 1931 in rural Indiana. His childhood was marked by poverty and his father's chronic illness. A significant early influence was Myrtle Kennedy, the pastor's wife at a local Nazarene church, who encouraged his religious studies. While Jones reportedly showed an early interest in ministry, dark undercurrents were also present. He was known for destructive pranks, early use of profanity, and disturbing acts like killing small animals. Yet he was also a voracious reader, consuming the works of political giants like Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, and Adolf Hitler, alongside the seemingly disparate philosophies of Mahatma Gandhi. Journalist and Jones biographer Tim Reitman suggested that Jones's fascination with religion stemmed from a deep-seated desire for belonging, a longing for a family. Jones attended Richmond High School and later sporadically attended Indiana University, finally earning a degree in secondary education in 1961. By this time, he was married and had joined the Methodist Church. It was during these formative years that Jones developed a profound and lasting aversion to racial segregation. The late 1950s saw Jones attending a Pentecostal latter-rain convention, a movement that deeply impressed him. Inspired, he began conducting his own tent revivals, complete with faith-healing rituals. However, the latter rain's eventual disapproval of such practices led Jones to break away and establish his own ministry, initially called Wings of Healing, which would later become the infamous People's Temple. Key influences on Jones's theology included William M. Branham, a prominent figure in the latter-rain movement, who preached that individuals could manifest divine, supernatural abilities. Jones was also drawn to the International Peace Mission and its leader, Father Divine, also known as George Baker. Jones incorporated many of Father Divine's teachings, emphasizing communal living and outreach to the poor. In 1964, Jones shifted away from Pentecostalism, aligning himself with the Disciples of Christ, a denomination more in line with his evolving beliefs. He was ordained as a minister within the Disciples' Church that same year, and the People's Temple maintained its association with the denomination. Back in Indiana, Jones became an active participant in the civil rights movement, working with the NAACP and the Urban League. He made a powerful statement by adopting several non-white children. He spearheaded demonstrations against segregated businesses, and by the end of 1961, Indianapolis had achieved a level of integration that surpassed many other urban centers, largely due to Jones's efforts. But a dramatic shift was on the horizon. In 1961, Jones began to preach to his followers about a chilling vision: the imminent nuclear annihilation of most of America. He claimed that South America would be the sole sanctuary. In 1962, this fear led him to travel to South America, scouting potential locations for his temple. His journey included a stop in Guyana before he continued to Brazil. Upon his return to Indiana, the temple faced severe financial difficulties. Jones temporarily returned to the revival circuit to stabilize its finances, but his conviction of impending nuclear doom remained unshaken. After several trips to California, Jones finally decided to relocate his temple and ministry to Redwood Valley, near Ukiah, California, in 1964. To further his recruitment efforts, Jones took a job as a teacher in the Ukiah public school system. In 1968, the People's Temple was officially recognized by the Disciples of Christ denomination. By this time, their membership had grown to approximately 300 individuals. Jones began to articulate his unique ideology, which he termed apostolic socialism. He declared that traditional Christianity held an incorrect understanding of God and outright rejected the Bible. Central to his teachings, at least within the temple's inner circle, was the assertion of his own divinity. While he was careful not to make this claim publicly, he skillfully convinced his followers of his supreme status. Over time, this self-promotion intensified, ultimately permeating and controlling every aspect of temple life. He bizarrely claimed that everyone within the temple was homosexual except for himself and engaged in frequent sexual relationships with women of his choosing within the community. He demanded absolute loyalty and expected members to work tirelessly and surrender all their earnings to him and the temple. Jones famously told his followers, "Believe in what you see. If you see me as a friend, I will be your friend. If you see me as your father, I will be your father. If you see me as your God, I'll be your God." He rejected Christian baptism, instead baptizing his followers in his own way, in the holy name of socialism. He relentlessly preached about an approaching apocalyptic nuclear war and the supposed threat of white supremacists who would imprison temple members in concentration camps. Through his burgeoning local political connections, Jones expanded his reach to the national stage. Vice President Walter Mondale publicly praised the temple, and Jones even met and corresponded with then First Lady Rosalind Carter. Despite his political clout and generally positive coverage from the San Francisco Chronicle, the early 1970s brought the first whispers of dissent. Reports began to surface detailing staged healings and the physical and financial abuse of temple members. While similar issues had briefly emerged in Indiana, the allegations in California were far more serious. In 1972, the San Francisco Examiner published a series of exposés questioning Jones's claims of divinity and exposing his fraudulent healing practices. By 1973, former temple members were coming forward with disturbing accounts of sexual abuse of both women and men. Adding to the growing turmoil, Jones himself was reportedly becoming increasingly paranoid. He grew convinced that he was losing control of the temple, and the need for another relocation became increasingly apparent. The turning point came in March 1977. Marshall Kilduff published a damning exposé in New West magazine, meticulously detailing the widespread abuses within the People's Temple. This article proved to be Jones's breaking point. He realized that to avoid potential governmental investigations, a complete relocation to South America was necessary. He began to coerce temple members to make the move to what he promised would be a socialist paradise in Guyana. Once they arrived, their freedom was curtailed. They were forbidden from leaving. By May 1977, Jonestown's population had swelled to around 400, and it would soon exceed 600. Life in Jonestown was far from the promised paradise. Overcrowding was rampant, and food supplies were inadequate. Residents were forced to work tirelessly from dawn till dusk in agriculture and general maintenance. Food was barely sufficient and strictly rationed. Meanwhile, Jones secretly transferred the temple's considerable financial assets to offshore bank accounts, and in late 1977, he himself made the move to Jonestown. The residents of Jonestown were subjected to regular indoctrination sessions in the commune's central pavilion. Here they were immersed in the ideologies of socialism and communism, heavily influenced by the writings of Kim Il-sung and Mao Zedong. Jones relentlessly demonized the United States as an imperial villain, while extolling the virtues and ideas of figures like Kim Il-sung, Robert Mugabe, and Joseph Stalin. In late 1977, a growing number of temple defectors, including Timothy Stowen, formed a concerned relatives group. Their primary goal was to help their family members who remained trapped in Jonestown and were being prevented from leaving. Stowen traveled to Washington, D.C., tirelessly meeting with officials at the Department of State and any congressman willing to listen. Their efforts eventually caught the attention of California Congressman Leo Ryan, who contacted the Guyanese Prime Minister, Forbes Burnham. In June 1978, Deborah Layton, a courageous Jonestown escapee, provided a detailed affidavit outlining the horrific living conditions and criminal activities within the settlement. Facing increasing scrutiny and fearing intervention, Jones hired Mark Lane, a well-known proponent of JFK assassination conspiracies. Jones's strategy was to portray the temple as the victim of a grand conspiracy orchestrated by forces within the United States. His ultimate aim, he told Lane, was to restore his reputation in America and eventually return freely. Jones's paranoia about a potential governmental raid on Jonestown spiraled. He began conducting frequent drills known as White Nights. During these terrifying exercises, he would announce an imminent attack by authorities, order armed guards to surround the compound, and summon all residents to the central pavilion for hours of forced singing, chanting, and praying. These drills were designed to instill constant fear and gradually introduce the idea of mass suicide as the ultimate act of socialist protest. The drills involved residents drinking a liquid mixture containing flavor aid, not Kool-Aid, as was initially widely reported, and what they were led to believe was poison. These exercises would sometimes last for days until Jones declared the all clear, claiming it was merely practice. Throughout this, Jones relentlessly hammered home the message that the U.S. government, particularly the CIA, was actively plotting to destroy their community. Jones is reported to have chillingly stated, "Let's keep them poor and hungry. If they're poor, they can't escape, and if they are hungry, they can't make plans." In late 1978, Jones developed a lung infection and falsely told his followers he had lung cancer. By this time, he was reportedly heavily using a cocktail of drugs, including Valium, Quaaludes, amphetamines, and barbiturates. His physical condition deteriorated rapidly. He lost a significant amount of weight and experienced swelling in his extremities. It was during this period that Congressman Leo Ryan organized a fact-finding mission to Guyana to investigate the growing allegations of abuse in Jonestown. Ryan, accompanied by a news crew from NBC and several other reporters, arrived in Guyana on November 15th. 2 days later, they traveled by small plane to Port Kaituma, a short distance from Jonestown. They were hosted that evening in the Central Pavilion. It was during this gathering that Vernon Gosney bravely passed a note to NBC reporter Don Harris, pleading for assistance for himself and Monica Bagby to leave Jonestown. As tensions within Jonestown escalated and rumors of abuse and confinement spread among Ryan's group, they made a hurried departure on the evening of November 18th. Ryan took 15 members of the commune who wished to leave with him to the airstrip at Port Kaituma. Back in Jonestown, Marceline Jones, Jim's wife, attempted to reassure the remaining residents, announcing that everything was all right and instructing them to return to their dormitories. Meanwhile, Jones's aides were preparing a large tub of grape flavor aid laced with sedatives, barbiturates, and potassium cyanide. As Ryan's party attempted to board 2 waiting airplanes at the Port Kaituma airstrip, a wagon pulled by a tractor arrived, carrying armed gunmen loyal to Jim Jones. They opened fire on the congressman's group. NBC cameraman Bob Brown managed to capture a few moments of film before he was killed. Congressman Leo Ryan was also murdered, along with 3 other members of his party. In total, 5 people were killed at the airstrip. News of the attack at Kaituma quickly reached Jim Jones. He learned that his gunmen had failed to eliminate the entire party, and some had managed to escape and were attempting to fly out of Guyana. Furthermore, a few members of Ryan's group and some Jonestown residents had managed to flee into the surrounding jungle. Jones told his remaining temple members that the Soviet Union, their supposed ideological ally, would not accept them. He declared that their only remaining option was revolutionary suicide. Decades later, the massacre at Jonestown remains a virtually inexplicable tragedy. While Jones's immediate motive appears to have been a desperate attempt to evade governmental repercussions and likely criminal charges, the question of how one man could convince hundreds to commit suicide and even murder their own children continues to haunt us. Undoubtedly, many were unwilling participants, while others were seemingly indoctrinated to the point of not only accepting their own deaths but also enforcing the deadly act upon those who hesitated. The few temple members who survived did so by hiding in the dense jungle surrounding Jonestown. In a grim irony, Jim Jones's 2 biological sons were away from Jonestown attending a basketball game and were spared the mass killing. The scale of the death was unprecedented in modern times, a horror not seen since the Jewish Holocaust orchestrated by Adolf Hitler. In the face of such incomprehensible loss, it is natural to search for explanations beyond the actions of a single, albeit deranged individual. This has fueled numerous conspiracy theories. One prevalent theory suggests that the Jonestown massacre was the result of a botched mind control experiment conducted by the American Central Intelligence Agency, an extension of their earlier LSD and hypnosis experiments under the infamous codename MK Ultra. While there is no question that Jim Jones employed sophisticated mind control techniques on his followers, there is no credible evidence linking the American military or intelligence agencies to the events in Jonestown. Jones masterfully exploited the vulnerabilities of his followers, offering hope to the hopeless, family to the lonely, and food to the hungry. Once they were isolated in Guyana, they were effectively trapped, impoverished, and completely under his tyrannical control. Jones had rehearsed this very scenario with his white knight drills, and tragically, many likely believed this final act was just another drill. Speculation persists that many of Jones's followers were drugged with sedatives or psychoactive substances prior to the poisoning. But again, concrete evidence to support this claim remains elusive. Another conspiracy theory suggests that the mass killing was deliberately orchestrated to obscure the assassination of Congressman Leo Ryan. Ryan had co-sponsored the Hughes-Ryan Amendment, a piece of legislation that mandated congressional oversight of CIA covert activities. It is certainly plausible that this amendment was not favored by elements within the intelligence community. However, the notion that they would orchestrate the murder of 900 innocent people to avenge Ryan's death seems wildly disproportionate. Furthermore, Senator Harold Hughes, the other co-sponsor of the amendment, was never harmed or threatened. The amendment had also been passed 2 years prior, and Ryan's death would have had no bearing on its implementation. Finally, if the intention was to cover up Ryan's assassination, the mass murder of hundreds would have achieved the exact opposite, drawing intense global scrutiny. Finally, former comedian and lifelong anti-establishment activist Dick Gregory proposed a bizarre theory that the bodies of the 900 victims in Guyana were intended to be used to smuggle heroin into the United States. Needless to say, there is absolutely no evidence or support for this outlandish idea. The People's Temple, by nearly every definition, was a cult centered around the charismatic yet deeply disturbed figure of Jim Jones. He preyed on the vulnerable, the poor, the elderly, the disenfranchised, downtrodden minorities, and the mentally ill. Jones offered them solace, a sense of belonging, and the promise of salvation and a better life. In return, he demanded absolute and unquestioning obedience. Members were required to donate all their possessions and earnings to the group. He preached a twisted version of socialism infused with his own increasingly bizarre theological interpretations. When the traditional concept of God no longer sufficed, Jones himself stepped into that void, proclaiming his own divinity. He presented himself as a friend, a teacher, a leader, and ultimately a god. All he demanded was unwavering adherence to his every dictate. He denigrated traditional Christian beliefs, asserting that his way was the only true path to salvation and fulfillment, offering a ready-made family and all the spiritual guidance one could ever need. Once in the isolated confines of Jonestown, the followers were trapped, impoverished, exhausted, and hungry. They were stripped of their autonomy, leaving them with no viable alternative but to submit to Jones's will.